The restaurant hummed with soft jazz and expensive laughter. Crystal glasses caught the golden light like tiny suns, reflecting the curated perfection of a family that believed image was everything. Lena Reyes, 28, stepped through the door in a sleek black dress that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. She hadn't seen her parents in years. Not since the night they told her she'd never belong in their world. Tonight, they'd invited her to celebrate their 30-year wedding anniversary in what they called the best restaurant in town. She knew it well. Every corner of it, every decision, every recipe, every polished floorboard had passed through her hands. Her mother's perfume hit first, expensive, suffocating. Margaret's eyes scanned Lena from head to toe, judging the simplicity of her look, the understated grace. "Darling," she said with that high, brittle tone, "we've arranged a table for the grown-ups. You can sit with the cousins at the kids' table, yes?" The laughter that followed was sharp, rehearsed. Lena smiled softly, the kind that hit a storm. "Of course," she replied, her voice calm, her eyes tracing the logo etched into the menus, her signature disguised as design. Somewhere, in the corner, Ethan caught her gaze. A silent question lingered. Was she ready? Lena gave the faintest nod. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. The chatter around the kids' table was a collage of high-pitched laughter and clattering cutlery. Lena sat among cousins in their early 20s, who barely looked up from their phones, their filtered faces glowing blue under candlelight. Across the room, her parents entertained a circle of business friends, boasting about legacy and lineage as if those words could hide the cracks beneath. Lena smiled faintly, swirling her wine. The stem caught the reflection of her parents' laughter, hollow, metallic. Every sound in the restaurant carried meaning now. The rhythm of servers' steps, the clink of plates, the echo of her name whispered respectfully by staff, who recognized their true employer. She didn't speak. She let the silence build its own story. The girl they'd once dismissed as unfocused was now the quiet center of the empire they admired. A waiter approached, his posture almost reverent. "Would you like another glass, Miss Reyes?" he asked softly. Heads turned, subtle confusion flickering across her cousins' faces. Lena nodded, her tone calm but commanding. "Yes, please. And tell Chef Alvarez the salmon is perfect tonight." The waiter smiled knowingly before retreating. Margaret glanced over from across the room, sensing something but not quite placing it. Lena leaned back, her eyes tracing the artwork on the wall. Her selection, her framing, her taste embedded everywhere. Every detail whispered ownership. The irony tasted better than the wine. Tonight wasn't the return of a forgotten daughter. It was the unveiling of an architect hiding in plain sight. A burst of laughter from the main table drew attention. Margaret raised her glass, retelling some embellished story of Lena's culinary experiment phase, painting it as childish rebellion. The crowd chuckled. The kind of laughter that cuts with sugar-coated cruelty. Lena felt the memory flicker. Years ago, being told her dream was a waste of tuition. But instead of anger, she felt stillness. Growth had changed the currency of pain. She glanced toward Ethan, who offered a quiet half-smile, a reminder that patience was her sharpest weapon. She lifted her glass in silent acknowledgement toward her mother, the crystal's ring slicing through the noise like a blade of light. The host approached the microphone, tapping it gently. Conversations tapered into a polite hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we continue with tonight's celebration, we'd like to extend a special acknowledgement to the individuals who make this place possible." Lena's heartbeat slowed. The air thickened. Across the table, her parents straightened proudly, assuming the praise was theirs to receive. Lena's fingers traced the rim of her glass, a slow circle of calm control. Her eyes lingered on the menu, on her hidden signature, soon to be recognized not as decoration, but as declaration. The world had always told her to earn a seat. Tonight, she built the table. The clinking of silverware softened as servers began to move differently, less performative, more reverent. Lena noticed it immediately. Each waiter who passed her table offered a faint nod or a subtle smile, small gestures that carried quiet allegiance. Her mother's voice, still animated with champagne confidence, cut across the room. "Isn't it just perfect?" Margaret beamed to her guests. "I've been coming here for months. The owner really knows how to create class." The irony curled in the air like smoke. Lena's fingers brushed the rim of her glass again. She looked at the waiter placing a dish before her. Her own creation, plated precisely as she designed it years ago. Every detail was hers, down to the swirl of sauce. The mask of the evening was beginning to thin, and the night's orchestration had only just begun. A cousin leaned over. "How'd you get the waiter to treat you like royalty?" she whispered half-jokingly. Lena smiled. "Maybe he recognizes taste." The words were light, but her tone carried gravity. Across the room, Ethan rose from his seat, speaking quietly to Marcus, the manager. Their exchange was subtle, precise, pieces sliding into place. Margaret's laughter continued to dominate the table, but cracks were forming. One guest mentioned that the restaurant's owner was rumored to be mysteriously private. Another swore she'd seen the chef greet Lena by name earlier. The ripple began, soft, questioning, growing. The kind of curiosity that builds tension without sound. The chef emerged from the kitchen. A tall man with silvering hair and a smile that carried pride rather than subservience. He approached the main table, wiping his hands on his apron. "Everything to your liking?" he asked the room. Margaret, ever the showwoman, clasped her hands. "Oh, divine," she declared. "You must tell your boss how impressed we are." The chef's eyes flicked toward Lena for just a second, long enough for the room to notice. That single look cut through conversation like a blade. The sound of forks resting on plates echoed faintly. People started to glance between Lena and the staff, trying to piece together what their hosts hadn't yet seen. The stage lights of pride were slowly dimming, and truth crept in through the cracks. Ethan rejoined her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "They're setting up the announcement," he murmured. Lena exhaled softly, not relief, but precision. She could feel her parents' attention wavering, Margaret beginning to sense unease she couldn't name. Charles frowned, scanning the room, confused by the sudden change in staff demeanor. The restaurant, once filled with casual laughter, now vibrated with anticipation. It wasn't noise. It was breath held collectively. Lena took another sip of wine, its dark red hue reflecting in her eyes like velvet steel. Every humiliation she'd endured was about to become applause. The host returned to the microphone, his voice smooth but charged with significance. "Before we proceed with the next course," he said, "I'd like to acknowledge someone very special tonight, the visionary behind this restaurant." A hush fell so quickly it was almost audible. Margaret's smile faltered, her glass lowering an inch. Charles turned slightly, following the host's gaze toward Lena. The air shimmered with realization that hadn't yet found words. Lena's eyes never left the stage. The moment felt eternal, a perfect balance between silence and eruption. What they saw as coincidence was orchestration. What they called pride was ignorance. Her empire. Their ignorance. It was all about to collide under the chandeliers they admired. The host's voice filled the silence like a slow drum beat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling toward Lena, "please join me in congratulating the brilliant mind and owner of this establishment. Mings. Lena Reyes." The sound of her name rippled across the room, gentle at first, then thunderous. Applause erupted, hesitant from some, wholehearted from others. Margaret's face drained of color. Her painted smile froze mid-expression. Charles blinked as if trying to process the impossible. Lena didn't stand immediately. She let the moment breathe, let disbelief settle. Then gracefully she rose. Her eyes met her parents'. No anger, just truth. Simple, unembellished and absolute. The child they dismissed had built the ground they stood on. Margaret blinked rapidly, her hands fluttering near her pearls. You own this place," she whispered, disbelief edging into her voice. Charles cleared his throat, forcing a dry chuckle that failed to sound natural. "Impressive," he managed, though his tone was hollow. Lena turned toward them, her voice soft, calm. "Every decision, every detail," she said. "Even the seat you chose." Margaret looked toward the children's table, realizing the cruel irony. A silence settled like snowfall, gentle yet suffocating. For the first time, Lena wasn't small beneath their gaze. She towered quietly, her power not in vengeance, but in the peace of no longer needing their approval. Ethan stepped closer, his presence steady beside her. "You deserve every bit of this," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Lena's lips curved into a faint smile. Across the room, Marcus raised a glass. "To Ms. Reyes," he announced, his voice ringing clear. "For building not just a restaurant, but a legacy." The applause came again, this time unrestrained. The sound wrapped around Lena like light. Her eyes flicked toward her parents once more, not in triumph, but closure. She had invited them here to see what grace looked like after rejection. The crown didn't rest on vengeance. It rested on peace. The night shifted tone. Laughter returned, but softer now. Genuine, warm. Servers moved with renewed pride, greeting Lena openly, no longer hiding respect behind discretion. She shook hands, exchanged brief words, and thanked guests who congratulated her. Meanwhile, her parents sat motionless. Margaret's fingers tapped the tablecloth, each tap a denial she couldn't sustain. Charles finally looked up, eyes glassy with something between regret and realization. The empire they'd admired had her fingerprints all over it, yet they had never seen her for what she was. Unstoppable. When the crowd's attention shifted, Lena returned to her table. Ethan slid her chair out gently, a small act of respect. "You didn't have to prove anything," he said quietly. Lena looked around, her gaze sweeping over the chandeliers, the guests, the tables, all born from her design. "I didn't," she replied, voice calm and low. "I just wanted them to see what they threw away." She raised her glass one final time, not toward her parents, but toward the staff, the builders, the dreamers who had helped her shape this empire. And as the camera of the evening panned across every face in awe, Lena's calm smile became the night's closing note. A portrait of earned peace, standing tall where condescension once sat her low. As the applause faded, Lena's gaze drifted upward, to the chandeliers she'd chosen years ago, each crystal a reminder of the nights she'd worked until dawn. The sound of clinking glasses blurred into the echo of her younger self wiping tables in a cheap diner. The memory flooded back with cruel clarity, the smell of grease, the sting of condescension in her parents' words. "You'll never make a living in kitchens." She remembered the rejection letter from culinary school, the one she refused to accept as final. She'd taken double shifts, burned her hands, studied from borrowed textbooks, built recipes on notebook paper, stained with coffee. The lights above her now weren't decoration. They were proof. Every shimmer was a scar, reborn as beauty. She could still feel the heat of those early mornings when she'd cook alone in borrowed kitchens, sleep-deprived but alive. Every failed recipe became a teacher. Every burned sauce, a scar she carried forward. She learned flavor the way others learned power, through persistence. There had been nights she'd cried in walk-in freezers, unseen, her breath fogging around broken dreams. But somewhere between exhaustion and faith, she'd realized something vital. She didn't need their table. She could build her own. And she did, piece by piece, flame by flame, until the world she dreamed of stopped being a fantasy and became a foundation. There had been one night, she remembered, when she'd nearly given up. Rent overdue, hands blistered, rejection letters piling high. Then, out of nowhere, a kind stranger, Marcus, offered her a job at his small cafe. "You've got talent," he'd said. "Just need a stage." He had given her that stage, and she turned it into an empire. Standing here now, watching Marcus toast her success, she felt tears press against composure. But she didn't let them fall. Not tonight. The world didn't need to see her weakness. It was written in every success she'd carved out of pain. Back in the present, Lena's parents watched in silence as she laughed with guests, her ease disarming. Margaret's thoughts spiraled back through time. Her daughter's childhood drawings of Ray's restaurant, the fights they dismissed as phases. She remembered the day she told Lena, "People like us dine. We don't serve. And now, we don't serve." Her words stood as ghosts in the air. Charles, stoic as ever, avoided her gaze, perhaps realizing what his indifference had cost him. For the first time, Margaret saw not rebellion, but vision. The irony bit deep. The dream she'd mocked had turned into the world she wanted to belong to. Later that evening, Lena stepped briefly outside to breathe. The city hummed beyond the restaurant's glass facade. Horns, footsteps, fragments of life she'd once been buried beneath. Ethan joined her, standing close but silent. "Do you ever think about the girl you were?" he asked. Lena exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool air. "Every day," she said. "She built this. She earned tonight." Inside, through the window, her reflection merged with the restaurant's glowing sign. Ray's, written in gold. Her parents' name, her design, her triumph. For once, the name didn't sting. It sang. The music softened to a low hum, violins whispering beneath the murmur of subdued voices. Margaret sat motionless, fingers still wrapped around her half-empty glass. Her reflection in the wine shimmered. A distorted portrait of a woman realizing she'd mistaken arrogance for sophistication. Charles leaned back, his jaw locked, the rhythm of his pulse visible at his temple. Across the room, Lena spoke briefly with the staff, her composure effortless, her authority quiet yet magnetic. No speeches, no gloating, just the calm certainty of a woman who had nothing left to prove. For the first time, her parents saw her not as a daughter out of line, but as a force of nature they could neither control nor claim credit for. The tables had finally turned, and they were hers to sit at, they were hers to own. Margaret finally stood, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The guests pretended not to notice, though every eye followed her. She crossed the room toward Lena, her face struggling to hold composure. "You should have told us," she said quietly, voice trembling. Lena turned, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "I did," she replied. "You just weren't listening." The words landed like silk over glass, soft but cutting. Margaret's lips parted, but no defense came. Charles watched from the table, eyes lowered. For once, the silence between them carried more truth than any apology could. Charles rose next, slower, heavier. He approached with a careful calm, the same composure he'd once used to mask disappointment. "I underestimated you," he said, his voice flat but sincere. Lena looked at him for a long moment. "You taught me to measure value in silence," she said quietly. "I learned to let it speak for me." He nodded once, a gesture more acknowledgement than apology. Around them, waiters continued clearing plates, the night moving on despite the stillness of their moment. Some things couldn't be repaired, but they could be seen. And that was enough. The crowd began to thin, laughter and conversation resuming in gentle waves. Ethan appeared beside Lena, his hand brushing hers. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, gaze distant but steady. "They saw me," she whispered. "They saw me," she whispered. "That's enough," he smiled softly. "You didn't just show them who you are. You reminded them what they lost." The room glowed again, soft, restored, alive. The hum of dishware, the distant clink of glasses, all ordinary sounds now, yet charged with meaning. Lena took one last look at the space she had built from every rejection. It wasn't revenge that satisfied her. It was peace, earned from perseverance. As the night drew to a close, Marcus approached with the bill folder, a symbolic gesture rather than necessity. "You want to sign it?" he asked with a wink. Lena smiled, taking the pen. Her name flowed across the page, deliberate, graceful. Margaret and Charles watched quietly from their seats, eyes softened not with pride, but with recognition. The paper wasn't just a formality. It was history, rewriting itself. The daughter they had belittled now signed their evening into existence. As she closed the folder and handed it back, she whispered, almost to herself, "Paid in full." The line hung in the air like poetry, final and flawless. Lena stood at the edge of the dining room, the last of the guests gathered loosely in their seats. The host offered her the microphone, but she didn't take it. She didn't need amplification. Her presence filled the space. "Thank you all," she began, her voice clear, calm, melodic. "This restaurant isn't about luxury. It's about second chances. It's for anyone who was ever told they rent enough." The staff stilled, faces glowing in quiet pride. "I built this place because I wanted a table where everyone belonged, even those who told me I couldn't." Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on her parents. The weight of her words didn't accuse. It enlightened. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was reverent. A standing ovation born not from spectacle, but from respect. Her voice lingered in the air, soft yet magnetic. "Some of us don't inherit opportunity. We build it, one burnt meal at a time." A faint smile touched her lips. "And sometimes the people who doubt us become the reason we succeed." A few guests chuckled, sensing the weight behind the humor. Margaret's eyes welled. Charles shifted, as if trying to reconcile pride with regret. "Tonight isn't about me proving anything," Lena continued. "It's about remembering that worth isn't granted. It's chosen." She set the microphone down. The sound of it resting echoed through the room, a quiet punctuation mark that felt like freedom. Marcus raised his glass once more, voice breaking the reverent quiet. "To Lena Reyes," he said softly, "for reminding us what grace looks like." Laughter and applause followed, genuine this time. Ethan approached her, pride written all over his face. "You didn't just build a restaurant," he said. "You built a home for second chances." Lena smiled, the tension of years dissolving into a single breath of gratitude. She turned back to the crowd. "I had to fall apart to become this," she said quietly, "and I wouldn't change a single scar." The audience stood again, not for the owner of a restaurant, but for the woman who turned rejection into light. When the applause faded, Margaret approached again. No grand gestures this time. "Lena," she began, voice low. "I was wrong." The words quivered. "Brittle but genuine." Lena took a breath. "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "You just couldn't see me yet." The kindness in her tone disarmed her mother completely. Margaret nodded, eyes glistening, and for a brief moment she looked at her daughter not as an extension of herself, but as something extraordinary she hadn't helped create. Charles followed quietly, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder, a rare, unspoken apology. For the first time, the Reyes family stood together, not in hierarchy, but in truth. Later that night, as guests began to leave, Lena stood by the entrance, thanking each one personally. The hum of conversation faded into the slow rhythm of closing time. When the doors finally shut, she stood alone amid the quiet glow of her creation. The clinking glassware, the scent of rosemary and wine, the gentle creak of oak, her empire breathing softly around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting gratitude wash over her. There was no more proving to do, no validation to chase, Just peace. The kind that comes when you've built the life others said you never could. Outside, the city pulsed with quiet midnight rhythm. The streets shimmered under light rain, puddles reflecting the golden glow of her restaurant sign. Ray's, a name that finally belonged to her. Ethan joined her, slipping a coat gently around her shoulders. "You did it," he said softly. She smiled, watching her reflection in the glass door overlap the glowing letters. "No," she replied. "We did." Behind them, through the window, her parents lingered a moment longer, still seated in the now empty restaurant, their faces faintly illuminated by candlelight. For once, they didn't look proud or ashamed, just human. Lena turned toward the street, ready for a life that no longer required permission. They began to walk, their footsteps echoing softly along the slick sidewalk. Lena's heels clicked in rhythm with the rain, each step lighter than the last. Ethan reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate this time. "What happens now?" he asked. Lena looked up, her eyes catching the faint glow of passing headlights. "Now I stop trying to prove who I am," she said, "and just live it." The world around them felt quieter, the chaos of the evening dissolving into something gentle and new. The weight she'd carried for years, expectations, judgment, doubt, finally slipped off her shoulders, leaving only the woman she had built from the ashes of dismissal. Inside, the restaurant manager dimmed the lights, the chandeliers flickering one last time before fading to soft darkness. Margaret and Charles sat alone, surrounded by empty glasses and lingering fragrance of wine and rosemary. "She really did it," Margaret whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. Charles nodded slowly. "We raised her to follow rules," he said. "She learned how to break them better." Their voices were small, stripped of pride, yet touched with wonder. They had tried to shape her in their image, and failed beautifully. Outside, the faint sound of Lena's laughter drifted in with the wind, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It sounded like home. Lena and Ethan reached the corner, pausing beneath a streetlight that hummed faintly. She turned back for a moment, looking at the restaurant's glowing facade. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like legacy. Every insult, every setback, every cold dismissal had carved the architecture of who she had become. "You know," she said, voice soft against the sound of rain, "I used to think I needed their approval to matter." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "And now?" Lena looked ahead, eyes steady. "Now I realize they needed mine." As they walked away, the camera of memory lingered. On the glowing sign, the flickering candles, the echoes of laughter that had rewritten years of silence. Lena didn't look back again. The night air felt alive, fragrant with possibility. The city stretched before her like an unwritten future, each step a promise made only to herself. For once, she wasn't the girl at the kids' table or the woman proving she belonged. She simply was. The scene faded not with vengeance, but with serenity. The sound of soft rain blending into the slow swell of strings. Somewhere in the distance, a new dawn waited to rise.